The final radio messages from the Bismarck were not dramatic cries for help or panicked pleas. They were something far more unsettling. They were calm, measured, almost routine. Even as the ship drifted crippled in the Atlantic, unable to steer properly and surrounded by enemy forces closing in from every direction, the transmissions continued with professional restraint. Course updates, damage reports, status checks. On the surface, it sounded like business as usual. But beneath that controlled tone was an unspoken truth everyone on board already understood. There would be no escape. By the morning of May 27, 1941, the Bismarck was no longer the terrifying symbol of German naval dominance it had been just days earlier. British torpedoes had damaged its rudder, locking it into a slow, helpless circle. Every attempt to regain control failed. Engineers worked through the night, exhausted and injured, hoping for a miracle that never came. And yet, the radio operators kept transmitting. Not because they believed rescue was coming, but because duty demanded it. What makes these final messages so haunting is not what was said, but what wasn't. There is no recorded moment where fear breaks through the professionalism. No admission of despair. No emotional farewell broadcast to the world. Instead, the crew followed protocol to the end, fully aware that each transmission might be their last contribution to history. In war, especially naval warfare, communication is more than information. It's discipline. And discipline, for the men of the Bismarck, held firm even when survival no longer seemed possible. The ship's captain, Ernst Lindemann, knew the situation was beyond recovery. So did the officers. So did most of the crew. The British fleet was assembling with overwhelming firepower, and air support ensured there would be no chance to slip away under cover of darkness. Still, the radio crackled with controlled updates, as if maintaining order in the airwaves could somehow preserve order in reality. It was a final act of professionalism in the face of certain destruction. There's a powerful psychological weight in that choice. When hope disappears, people often expect chaos, panic, emotional collapse. But aboard the Bismarck, the opposite happened. Structure became a form of resistance. By continuing to communicate clearly and calmly, the crew preserved their identity as sailors, not victims. They weren't surrendering to fear, even as they accepted the outcome. The last coherent radio message sent from the Bismarck acknowledged the ship's dire condition. Ammunition was running low. Damage was extensive. Enemy forces were closing in. And then, gradually, the signals stopped. Not because the crew suddenly gave up, but because the ship was being systematically silenced. Antennas destroyed. Power systems failing. Explosions tearing through compartments that had once been alive with routine activity. That silence carried immense weight. For the German command receiving those messages, it wasn't just the loss of contact. It was the realization that the pride of the fleet was moments away from annihilation. For the British, it confirmed that the hunt was ending. And for history, it preserved a chilling snapshot of how modern warfare strips away illusion. The Bismarck had been designed to dominate the seas. Yet in its final hours, all that remained was discipline, routine, and a voice fading into static. Those last transmissions weren't about strategy anymore. They were about dignity. About holding on to structure when chaos presses in from every side. And that's what makes the final radio calls of the Bismarck so unforgettable. They weren't cries of desperation. They were the sound of duty continuing, even when the end was already written. When the radio from the Bismarck finally fell silent, it didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic final sentence, no clear moment where someone said, "This is the end." Instead, the silence crept in gradually. Broken transmissions becoming shorter, weaker, and less frequent, until the airwaves were left with nothing but static. That quiet marked more than the destruction of a single battleship. It marked the moment communication itself stopped serving strategy and became something else. Entirely. A farewell without words. In naval warfare, radio contact is a lifeline. As long as a ship can transmit, it still exists within the larger system of command and control. It can be tracked, assisted, reinforced, or at least remembered as operational. But once the Bismarck went silent, it slipped beyond that system. The ship was no longer part of a coordinated war effort. It was alone, surrounded by enemy vessels, cut off not just physically but symbolically. Silence meant abandonment, even if no one chose it. For the men still fighting aboard the ship, that loss of communication carried a quiet finality. There would be no more instructions from high command, no further reports sent into the world. Whatever happened next would unfold without witnesses beyond the horizon. In that sense, the silence was almost merciful. It spared the crew from narrating their own destruction. The battle that followed would be written by explosions, flooding compartments, and the relentless impact of British shells, not by words. As the British fleet closed in and opened fire, the Bismarck endured an overwhelming assault. Shell after shell struck the superstructure, tearing apart gun positions, rangefinders, and command centers. Fires spread. Systems failed. One by one, the tools that made the ship a symbol of dominance were reduced to twisted metal. And with each hit, the gap between the Bismarck and the outside world grew wider. No updates. No confirmations. Just the cold certainty that the end was approaching. What makes this silence so powerful is what it represents historically. The Bismarck had been built to embody a certain belief that sheer size, armor, and firepower could impose control over the sea. Its design reflected an era where battleships were considered the ultimate expression of naval strength. But its final moments told a different story. Surrounded by aircraft carriers, destroyers, and coordinated fleets, the Bismarck was overwhelmed not by a single decisive blow but by persistent, organized pressure. The silence that followed wasn't just the death of a ship. It was the collapse of an idea. When the Bismarck finally sank, taking more than 2,000 men with it, the ocean swallowed the last physical traces of those final moments. What remained was absence. No voice. No signal. No correction to the story as it would be told by the victors. Silence has a way of giving history its sharpest edges. It leaves room for reflection, but also for myth. The unanswered radio call became a symbol not of failure, but of vulnerability. Proof that even the most formidable machines can be isolated and erased. In the aftermath, naval strategy shifted rapidly. The era of the battleship faded, replaced by the dominance of air power and carrier-based warfare. The Bismarck didn't just sink beneath the waves. It marked the end of a worldview. Its silence echoed far beyond that morning in 1941. Influencing how future wars would be fought and how power would be measured at sea. And that's why the final silence matters so much. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't demand attention in the moment. But in hindsight, it speaks volumes. It reminds us that in war, communication is more than coordination. It's presence. And when that presence disappears, what's left behind is not just wreckage, but a haunting reminder that even the strongest voices, once cut off, vanish without a sound.